unreliable memoir of Bertha Braun. Wehrmacht medic and methamphetamine, Eukodal, barbiturate, and anything addict and raging alcoholic. It was August 1942, and myself, Heinz, Weasel, Carl, and Shithead had been standing around, stamping our feet, freezing our asses off, trying to bum cigarettes, though we already had them, which were anything but the fucking cow shit tasting Russian crap, which were half cardboard anyway to make them look longer, one supposed. How the fuck the series of ups and downs dominated by tragedies and baladies had led us exactly from the fairly well-adjusted young men of the impossibly far-away 1930s to this shit. Half-destroyed village of Karpovka, a shortish drive from the rubble of Stalingrad to half-crazed, deeply corrupt drug addicts, thieves and murderers, is a tale perhaps beyond telling. You would have to have been there. You would not have wanted that I was Oberstarst Bertha Braun, in short, Obersprung, the fucking OTA, and you wouldn't have wanted to have been me either. Karpovka was notable only for having a few railway lines, which still somehow worked. I wouldn't have wanted to have been on the crew of shivering arbeiters fixing the constantly bombed-out rail system, even with their slave workers in pajamas in the rain, shifting all that freezing cold metal until they dropped. The Feldeisenbahn direction and the assholes in charge of the trains and the lines had done a pretty scheisse job of assessing the Soviet rail network prior to Operation Barbarossa. A lot of Ruski rolling stock at different gauges to the standard width of Dutch Autobahn, or even fucking Russian trains, as they were only built locally for moving coal and fucking beetroot. Whatever on top of this, the Russians had destroyed their engines and left hundreds of burnt-out carriages blocking the way, all of which had to be shifted before the lines had to be literally rebuilt to fit existing German trains. It was then that they found that many of these lines had originally been built on sand and loose cinder gravel, nothing which would ever take the weight of a ridiculously over-the-top National Socialist endlessly snaking convoy of tanks, trucks, artillery, ordnance, men and munitions, not in a million years. Oh, and medical supplies, not to forget those little beautiful packages. That's why we're here, freezing our tits off and feeling withdrawals and come-downs biting at us like SS dogs. Little did we know, silly little bitches that we were, that this would be the last and final Autobahn delivery by those lovely steam-belching black trains of our dreams. Everything was fucked and the Titanic of the Third Reich had hit its iceberg. Our train finally arrived, half a day late, not too bad by this point. Don't ever let anyone tell you that German trains always run on time. My arse, they do. I checked the numbers stenciled on the sides of the clattering wagons until they fell 5 on 9 dropped through the letterbox of my mind like a birthday card from mother, filled with Reichsmarks and the smell of home. In front of us, huge food crates were being dispensed to half-starved Goleshkin-owned field kitchen porters by half-starved supplies porters without eye contact. Our medical corps was down for a number of these, so I had to sign off on them, so some of my boys could start loading them into the Opel Blitz 4x4 cargo trucks. I knew that 20 minutes later the crowbars would be out, and they'd be filling their faces with air-set sausage and rock-hard rye bread in some dark corner, risking being shot. But what did I care? Where were my fucking drugs?
FL stood for Feldlazarett, a field hospital, of which we were 11.15 bewilligt 3. A number I always thought was good luck. I had somehow survived some ferocious action going right back to Czechoslovakia, Poland and France. My father, being of high rank and an ardent Nazi arse-licker, had got me out of the shitty combat unit I was in and through some, shall we say, Creative paperwork had gotten myself, and later, through my own ingenuity, my best friend, Shithead, transferred to the Sanitedienst des Heeres or non-combat medical corps. Still pretty fucking dangerous though, and traumatic, and bombs still fell on us. Shithead, in case you're wondering, got his name by stopping for a piss against some enormous self-propelled gun. Picture a tank with no roof or turret on it, just sides and a fucking great gun, right at the moment that one of the occupants decided to empty their shit bucket over the top of the armor plating. It was still steaming, poor fuck. He wasn't even wearing his helmet, so down his neck it went, all down his face. We all laughed, of course. The boys in the artillery piece looked over and out of the hatches and laughed too. It broke the tension. This was on the day before we launched Barbarossa into Soviet Russia, much to the surprise of that moron Stalin. All the tanks, trucks, guns, horses and men were lining up in an impossibly large spectacle of firepower. Of sheer will I hated the Nazis, but couldn't help but feel proud. Horst is the real name of Shithead, and he wasn't laughing. Blitzkrieg, aside from fuel and ammunition, is powered by drugs. Pervitin in particular was your energy boost, and fuck me sideways, it turned you into a Superman. Then sodium amytal, a barbiturate for when you needed to slow down and were going mad from 6 days sleep deprivation without food. Because do enough Pervitin and you aren't eating a crumb. Trust me, even water can be hard to get down you. I'd heard of these magic pills and even chocolate for the ladies before the war, but never tried them. People were working 15-hour shifts at factories and coming home, skipping dinner and taking the wife out dancing, or going looking for a fucker to be a killer for a regime which spoke out fiercely against drug addiction and sent you to Dachau if you smoked the hashish and opium, which came through the French Moroccans. It always seemed incongruous that the straight-laced workers were encouraged to become speed freaks, but hey, a lot of things were strange in those days. Better to keep your head down and keep your questions to yourself. Long story short, I'm strongly encouraged to enroll in the Wehrmacht by General Major Hermann Braun, my father. My once thriving Berlin bookshop was closed down without my having much of a say in the matter. They'd burned half the fucking books anyway, it seemed. The band list grew every day. I'd always loved reading. German literary culture was one of the gemstones of international culture. I had always believed. And the rest of the many-faceted reading material which came my way was a never-ending delight. I would sit here at this typewriter and name all that was lost to German popular consciousness during those years of unchecked madness, but I think it would make us both sad.
L stood for Feldlazarett, a field hospital, of which we were 503 a number. I always thought was good luck. I had somehow survived some ferocious action, going right back to Czechoslovakia, Poland, and France. My father, being of high rank and an ardent Nazi arse-licker, had gotten me out of the shitty combat unit I was in, and through some, shall we say, creative paperwork had got myself, and later, through my own ingenuity, my best friend, Shithead, transferred to the Sanitedienst des Heeres or non-combat medical corps. Still pretty fucking dangerous though, and traumatic, and bombs still fell on us. Shithead! In case you're wondering, got his name by stopping for a piss against some enormous self-propelled gun. Picture a tank with no roof or turret on it, just sides and a fucking great gun! Right at the moment that one of the occupants decided to empty their shit bucket over the top of the armor plating. It was still steaming, poor fuck! He wasn't even wearing his helmet, so down his neck it went, all down his face. We all laughed, of course. The boys in the artillery piece looked over and out of the hatches and laughed too. It broke the tension. This was on the day before we launched Barbarossa into Soviet Russia, much to the surprise of that moron Stalin. All the tanks, trucks, guns, horses, and men were lining up in an impossibly large spectacle of firepower. Of sheer will I hated the Nazis, but couldn't help but feel proud. Horst is the real name of Shithead, and he wasn't laughing. Blitzkrieg, aside from fuel and ammunition, is powered by drugs. Pervitin in particular was your energy boost, and fuck me sideways,
it turned you into a Superman. Then sodium amytal, a barbiturate, for when you needed to slow down and were going mad from 6-day sleep deprivation without food, because do enough Pervidin and you aren't eating a crumb. Trust me, even water can be hard to get down you. I'd heard of these magic pills and even chocolate for the ladies before the war, but never tried them. People were working 15-hour shifts at factories, then coming home, skipping dinner, and taking the wife out dancing, or going looking for a fuck at a beer keller for a regime which spoke out fiercely against drug addiction and sent you to Dachau if you smoked the hashish and opium which came through the French Moroccans. It always seemed incongruous that the straight-laced workers were encouraged to become speed freaks. But hey, a lot of things were strange in those days. Better to keep your head down and keep your questions to yourself. Long story short, I'm strongly encouraged to enroll in the Wehrmacht by General Major Hermann Braun, my father. My once thriving Berlin bookshop was closed down without my having much of a say in the matter. They'd burned half the fucking books anyway, it seemed. The banned list grew every day. I'd always loved reading. German literary culture was one of the gemstones of international culture. I had always believed in the rest of the many-faceted reading material which came my way was a never-ending delight. I would sit here at this typewriter and name all that was lost to German popular consciousness during those years of unchecked madness. But I think it would make us both sad.
I was visited by the Gestapo, all very shiny shark-toothed smiles and long leather coats. I would be paid for my 3 stories of a building on Prince Albrechtstrasse. The Gestapo had their expansive headquarters at number 8. And over a short period of time, the atmosphere of the area had become sinister and tainted. I never did receive the agreed sum, nor anywhere approaching it. But then I never did like to run a bookshop now half filled with National Socialist books, and a huge cardboard Hitler in the window display, with his perpetual advertisement for Mein Kampf, his eyes staring out like Nosferatu. My father topped up my bank account for being a good boy and not making waves, as if I'd have anywhere to spend it. And I was shipped off to basic training as the proud, grey, shiny new armed forces of my fatherland entered the Sudetenland, the German-speaking area of Czechoslovakia, to cheers and the waving of swastika flags by a minority of the populace. And the world looked on and said nothing. Hitler had promised not to invade any further than the line agreed to on a map with Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and Edward Douladier of France. Basic training and indoctrination was, I can tell you, tough, a shock to the system. A lot of shouting and running about in target practice, goose-stepping till it felt your legs would fall off, Heil Hitler saluting so much that your arm ached, too much to have a wank over the single photo of your girlfriend, or an actress cut out of a magazine which many kept inside the lining of their helmet. It all went by in a flash, and by the time March 1939 came around, I was not myself anymore. I had as much individuality as our shiny grey helmets or gas mask canisters or Cartwright greedy bolt-action rifles. I mean, really, giving us a rifle. Fundamentally based on a design from 1898, one shot at a time before fumbling around for the next cartridge and trying to jam it in the middle of a firefight. Ja, thanks for that. You could tell something was happening, all was a hive of activity, and we were sat in a large hangar with a map and chalkboard late at night. A fat Obersturmbannführer or some such shouty cunt, who in those days I hung on every word of and deeply respected, the training having done its job, stood out in front of us with his long baton and pointed at a highly illuminated map of where we were headed. He droned on for hours, was joined by other top brass filling in information. All I wanted was to get out there and kill the enemy now, there and then. But suddenly it was over,
and we were all sent to bed. I could not sleep and dreamt of war as the newsreels depicted it at the cinema. A few days later and we're in Czechoslovakia, but this time they're not smiling and waving flags, they are dying. And so are we. There are few things worse than a journey of several hundred kilometers sat on rags and dusty, draughty train carriages covered with horse shit, to be moved quick, sharp, into the backs of cargo trucks with wooden boards as seats, freezing your ass off on all-night drives to God knows where. But one of them is surely battle, one's first taste of battle disorientation and terror on top of your utter exhaustion. At least what you think is utter exhaustion, you're far from meeting that cunt yet. So, it's the 18th of March, and we sweep straight into enemy territory, the border having been breached on the 15th. A great, grey green, surging tide of menace.
We were a green as fuck. Infantry support unit. Running alongside or hiding behind, trying to keep up with panzers or scouting out ahead of panzers, detecting mines in opposition. There were more Czechs than we've been led to believe, and they had more tanks, but we were stronger. On day 2, we're all feeling absolutely fucked, and we're resting in and around some old barns with a clean well. The medical boys showed up, which raised a cheer as there were many wounded and a few gone mad in the head. I'd emptied my canteen of some disgusting slop, which filled the belly nonetheless. It was then that a bunch of us were called over by our Feldwebel and told to form a line in front of a small table by the medical tent. This was how I was to meet my first dose of Pervitin, and the ultimate love-hate relationship would begin. But remember, there is always a honeymoon period. A tall, unimpressive yet intense-looking doctor in horn-rimmed glasses asked my Erkenningsmark number. It was pressed into an oval metal disc which hung around one's neck on a chain and could be broken in two. I knew mine off by heart. So I told him efficiently, 5th ton, ARP 63, ARP 14. He found me on his list and handed me 3 tins and gestured for the next man. I quickly asked what was this. Nervous at my lack of protocol, he glared at me with a hint of a sly smile. You feel tired, take 1 or 2. But don't take too many sleep when it's feasible. The brown package pills are for when you absolutely have to sleep, and you must be sure to be in a safe place behind the lines. I heard my comrades whisper, what did he say? And a Chinese whisper passed down along the group of curious grunts. It was early evening now, and the light was starting to fade, sitting on a worn tire by the brazier glowing in an old oil drum. I examined my new acquisitions. Tins 1 and 2 were identical white-painted metal with a pressed number, and the obligatory swastika inside were several metal tubes with screw-on caps. They were colored blue and red with jaunty white writing on a slant which said Pervitin. The whole effect was of a roll of peppermints or breath fresheners you might have bought at some kiosk before the war. One of the fellows recognized them immediately and said, "Pervitin, now you're talking. Say goodbye to the blues boys." Someone told him to shut up. The third tin contained a stack of brown wax paper sachets through which one could feel small tablets. I put the lid back on that one and pushed it deep into my pocket. Unscrewing the lid from a tube of Pervitin, I tipped out one of the large bluish lozenges into my hand. It looked huge, and I hoped they didn't taste too bad. "Don't take it now, dumbhead! You'll be awake talking shit all night." I wasn't going to. I said defensively and put them away in an ammo pouch. Pretty soon we were told to fall out and get some sleep, so I skulked off to the barn and the minimal comfort I had been afforded. Then I slept and dreamt of ladies of the night, my hand down my enormous, dirty, shit-encrusted underwhite.
An age away in time. Time is relative. We were obliged by discipline and conscience to get back from the medical, food, and sparse blanket drop as soon as fucking possible. This much was critical. We were still fucking medics. Even if we had backed ourselves into the corner of being high as zeppelins, drunk as Goring and Stalin combined, or slit-eyed as alley cats with pupils like piss holes in the snow, to accomplish anything. Some cunt would have had us court-martialed if they'd known, except we were the last field hospital anywhere near us, and ranking officers would sneak in for their little tipple of this and that. The web of silence. Just around then, I had been warned to be ready, in total secrecy. As oberst of my roguish detachment, the 4th Panzer Army were due to attack the Soviet 64th Army in the southern suburbs of stinking Stalingrad. It wasn't going to be pretty. My blood and plasma supplies were getting thin. Nobody wanted to donate, they were all too physically fucked. I had to order them to give 500 ml, and nobody likes to do that to the demoralized, worn out, yes, but we still thought we were winning. That the city would be taken in weeks, that the Reds were broken. What fools we were. Never underestimate an opponent, your heart filled with hubris. You are an ant like every fucker else. It seemed impossible that we had only pushed up to the intimidatingly vast landmass at the banks of the endlessly snaking, mighty Don River in mid-July. There, we beheld the apocalyptic visions of the Battle of Kalish from July 25th to mid-August. Though there was much worse to come, and victorious the mighty 6th broke through the Don bridgehead, held by the Soviet 62nd and 64th armies. We broke their back from a distance with heavy artillery, followed up by Panzerkampfgruppen and infantry. And over the river we were, like Roman legends of old. My group of reprobates and I had witnessed the excesses of the worst of us, the well-erected gallows in every village filled with seemingly random peasants of all ages and sexes, and the piles of shot-through bodies, stacked like firewood beside deserted farms. It was then that I lost all faith in our cause. What had we become? What kind of superior breed of human, as we'd been assured we were since the Hitler-Jugend days? Imagine the Western world's Boy Scouts, but handling live grenades and snipers' rifles as children, still going camping in tents, wearing shorts, skinny dipping and singing fireside songs, but different fireside songs. Like the Horst Wessel lied, I won't talk about it here, it's too disgusting. I make no excuses, but imagine, if you will, that by a point in the game, we were trapped within an enormous machine, and were cogs within it. Your only ways out were refusal, court-martial, and execution, and don't ever think there wasn't plenty of that, just nowhere near enough, or suicide, and the shame on your family's honor, and the prospect of hell, as very many believed ourselves Christians. That is why the then Feldwebel Paulus eventually surrendered to the Russians. He was a Christian, and so would not take his own life. But that's much later on. Oh, the irony, that a people can hold such opposing views, which do not contradict in their minds. Thou shalt not kill, unless it's an Untermensch, or a Jew, or a communist, or a homosexual, or 1,000 other excluded categories. But as our belt buckle said, Gott timai tiens, God is with us. Well, if he was, then I know from personal experience that he is indistinguishable from Satan.
After we crossed the Don and paused to regroup and patch up the wounded who could be saved. In our little hospital, which hardly was worth the name, a 19-year-old private was shot for giving a piece of bread to a child.
I prayed that we'd win this thing, and fucking quickly, before we could no longer cover up what we had done, as the world would never forgive us. I knew of cruel labor camps. I knew there were prisoners in striped uniforms. But at this point, I don't think very many of us knew about the concentrations led to death camps growing day by day like a cancer. There were rumors of something, but it was dangerous to listen or tell. Who wants to know such things when you're trying to stay alive? Auschwitz had opened in May 1940 and carried on right into 1945. But we didn't know, not in 1942. If you told me then the full purpose and scope of that abomination, I'd have punched you and called you a traitor. Such is the nature of willful ignorance in extreme conditions. The Fifra, for instance, in my battle-matured, yet childishly molded mind of not yet 23 years, could never know of such things, much less order them to be. He was the Messiah of my boyhood, who had delivered the salvation of a shattered Deutschland, given back our national pride. Something hard to explain, which is so much a part of the Prussian psychological profile, that without it, many lost hope and became straw men. My own father's hard-won medals, his Iron Cross, his Blue Max from the mere 8 months he flew with Immelmann, Goering and von Richthofen, at least some period of time with the bloody Red Baron's flying circus. Albeit a junior new boy, headhunted, talented replacement for the endless dead aces lost in pointless dogfights over Flanders. He had apparently seriously distinguished himself, taking out 3 British Spad biplanes in his more maneuverable Fokker triplane, and saving the life of Oberleutnant Bertram von Doring, whose guns had jammed an aristocratic sitting duck, escorting him back over a hellscape of flak to a flat field behind the Kaiser's lines, where successful landings were made. A field auxiliary truck picked them up, and my father was soon drinking top-shelf schnapps with the big boys. Or so he loved to tell all and sundry, with his proud and fat friends at Yuletide. It may have been exaggeration or good old patriotic bullshit. I worked out the math at a young age. Dual Maxim machine guns with a full ammunition load in those days should not have been able to crash 3 Spads to the ground unless he literally fired the immaculate volley 3 times in a row without encountering resistance. Why did I believe Adolf Hitler when I had serious doubts about my own father? Because Hitler was like that. He could persuade 1 million people that black was white because they yearned to believe in something. I'm digressing, and for that I apologize, and for many other things, too many to recount. Just read books and you'll know. How am I telling you any of this? Due to sheer dumb luck and the laws of chance and survival. I'd been a scholar and could read Russian after a fashion. I translated complex orders and directives into German and took many beatings but survived. For my eternal shame and confusion, I am one of the 91,000 Soldaten of Paulus's mighty 6th Army who surrendered at Stalingrad. We swelled the ranks of other prisoners of war in the hellish cold of that winter of despair and defeat. Though on other than 70,000, 85,000 died. That next few months of maltreatment, neglect and dysentery. The rest endured a Siberian holiday. Frozen lumberjacks were forced to clear the rubble and bodies of rat-infested Russian cities we had pummeled. 6,000 survived to be repatriated in the mid-1950s phantom. Haunted revenants. Strangers in the land of their birth, where everything had moved on at such a pace. I am one of them. But why me? Why any of us? I'm consoled by my wife, whom I met after the war, that at least I saved far more lives than I ever took. But it's still not enough. Ignorance is no defense before the law of God or man. Our crates signed for and loaded into our little fleet of vehicles, having made certain my most precious cargo was safely ensconced in the opals under direct supervision of myself and Shithead, proceeded to locate the pervert and with the trained eye of a hawk, I greedily bushed a number of the bluish lozenges and next found the ampoules of Eukodal, a powerful opioid for special occasions, and reaching into my greatcoat for my tin box containing my trusty brass and glass syringe, snapped open a heavy glass tube and sucked it dry with my needle. I carried a rubber tourniquet in my right-hand pocket, and this was soon wrapped around my right arm as I tapped up a bulging, much-abused vein. Straight in, pull back, plume of fresh blood showing me I had been successful, and depressed the plunger and let the rubber tube fall from my teeth. I fell backwards into my corner behind the crates, out of sight, and saw Shithead doing something similar before sweet oblivion took us over. This could never last long for fear of detection, but my crew were fully trained to give us as long as possible before rousing us. By then the pervert had kicked in and I awoke with a jolt, ready for anything, any fucking thing. Blitzkrieg Doctor Number 1, point me at the blood and trouble, the anguish of burnt and mangled puppets. Give me a field telephone, a clipboard, and a bunch of fired up medics who'd seen a thing or two, and I would bark orders and make snap, life or death decisions until I dropped or became so crazy that Shithead would take me aside, hit me up with Eukodal, push sodium barbital into my mouth and shove me in my bunk with a bottle of Shnapps. My bunk had so many bottles under it that it resembled a distillery. I could only take it from Shithead. Anyone else would receive the left hook of a tricksy boxer gut. I miss him. So what next? Stupidity came next. Our main strength in the 6th Army and our 4th Panzer Army was long-range attack and high-speed movement through large open spaces like a wave, a tide of grey death. So as we're perfectly positioned to drive straight into what we imagined was a poorly defended Stalingrad right on the Volga River, where we could block Russian supply ships, of which we'd sunk almost 50. Wolfram von Richthofen,
Yes, that family name again.
of the Luftwaffe, dropped 1,000 tons of bombs onto every part of the city in just 48 hours. This killed thousands of civilians and reduced whole city blocks and industrial complexes to rubble, and twisted metal streetcars stood up on end, and cars were hurled into the upper floors of blazing frontless buildings. Tell me, how could one lead heavy panzers and bulky artillery through such an impassable terrain? All progress was halted, and so began the Rats' War. Hordes of bewildered tankers and bombardiers and grenadiers and truck drivers and you fucking name it were forced to learn very fast to crawl through the tightest of spaces, encountering the enemy at every turn. Fighting hand-to-hand, grenades were often thrown into buildings occupied by fellow Germans, while Russians threw a grenade at you from the top floor of the same building as winter set in. And temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees centigrade. Both food and ammunition became in shorter and shorter supply. There was no supply of cold weather clothing, and medieval-style weapons were fashioned from anything which could be used to kill. The starting handles of large engines, the heavy bar spanners used to change tires and tracks, honed down to a spike, most often the small shovels used for digging in. They were sharpened to a razor's edge and met many a throat, the stuff of nightmares you cannot imagine. For the longest time we still persisted as the Reds resisted, taking over the railway station, the high ground of Murmy of Kurgan, which allowed spotters to target smaller anti-tank artillery, now repurposed for anti-personnel work of an often intimate nature. Soon we had the whole city, but for the steep slopes coming up from the Volga, which always brought wave after wave of 19 million doses of Pervitin alone had been allotted to Operation Barbarossa. Now they were almost impossible to obtain. Germans had been known to fight each other to the death to steal the other man's final supply. I had seen this coming a long while back and had stashed holes in the ground where I would bury my precious supplies of all the drugs my body demanded in order to function. These cleverly thought out, obscure hidey holes were changed on a regular basis, and it became harder and harder to sneak off without attracting attention. I had been regularly cutting down my intake since the glory days, as I knew too well the finale would be a shock. Multiple terminal addictions throwing their merciless withdrawals at you in the bitterest cold you had ever experienced, where you ate rats or a stray dog if you were lucky. The whole of the Wehrmacht east of the Don were going into the biggest methamphetamine, opioid, and alcohol crash of all time, plus starvation. There will probably never be a crisis of that type and magnitude in the history of all the ages of short-sighted man, and men were going crazy day by day in ever-growing numbers, looking to me as the last remaining Oberst of a stripped-bare medical field unit to somehow save them as we'd done for so very long. I was their daddy, their dealer, their confessor, their priest, the last eyes they saw as they exited this life. I'll admit to you the awful truth that I held back pain-killing and anesthetizing medicines from mangled men with the gravest of wounds out of mine own simple human fear and greed. Shithead did the same. He was all done with them all, his mind almost gone, and many times I knew he had bumped off certain Nazi party diehards, whom by now we both despised. A strong hand over the nose and mouth in the nighttime. Goodbye, Kurt Meyer, who had kicked out the stools from under strung-up children and old people, and really enjoyed it. There were many such sadists. Don't ever let anyone tell you that all the war crimes were committed by the SS and the Einsatzgruppen. The Wehrmacht were in many ways complicit in the deepest barbarities, though conversely many resisted. Wore masks of survival, thought of their families and yearned to go home. Birds of a feather flocked together, and we oftentimes recognized one another's truce. Stuck in the heart of the devil's playground. That is exactly what you were. Stuck impotent, naked, guilty, wretched, broken, compromised and weak. The fucking master race laid bare as the ribcage you were leaning against whilst you gnawed at your sores for the sweetness. I fucking screeched it while you washed down your last Eukodal with the juice of your sweet shop sores. I spare the last thought to Hitler, shitting on some